Thank you, Iowa City. You know, when we were planning these events, we had no idea how many people would show up. And last night we were in Omaha, and we had to turn away 800 people who couldn't get in. And after I speak here, I think for the first time in my political life, I'm going to be running to another venue a block away to speak to another overflow crowd. So thank you all for coming out. Let me thank Ijima and Zach and Brian and Sandy and Patrick for all that they have said in defining why we are here today. We are here today because under Trump, our nation is facing a series of crises unprecedented in our modern history. And what we do now, in the coming days, in the coming weeks, and in the coming months, will impact not only our lives, but the lives of our kids, the lives of our grandkids, and in fact, the very well-being of the planet in terms of climate. So if there has ever been a time in the modern history of our country to stand up and fight back, now is that time. And in my view, and I say this with some knowledge and experience as a U.S. Senator, Trumpism will not be defeated by politicians inside the D.C. Beltway. For better or worse, that is not going to happen. It will only be defeated by millions of Americans in Iowa, in Vermont, in Nebraska, in every state in this country, who come together in a strong grassroots movement and say no to oligarchy, no to authoritarianism, no to kleptocracy, no to massive cuts in programs that low-income and working Americans desperately need. No to huge tax breaks for the wealthiest people in this country. And that is why I am in Iowa today. Well, thank you. We're in this together. Today in America, we are rapidly moving toward an oligarchic form of society where a handful of multi-billionaires not only have extraordinary wealth, but unprecedented economic, media, and political power as well. If you want to know who is running the U.S. government, simply take a look at Trump's inauguration. Do you remember that? No. Now, for better or worse, I was there, right on the front row. I got stuck there. And standing right behind Trump, as he was being sworn in, were the three wealthiest people in America: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg. Those are the three right behind them. And behind them were the mini billionaires. You know, they weren't worth hundreds of billions, but there were 13 of those billionaires who were nominated by Trump to be major agency heads. And when we talk about oligarchy, I want you all to remember this. In America today, while the wealthiest people, the 1%, have never, ever in the history of our country had it so good, at the same exact time, the working families of our country, as you well know, are struggling desperately to just make ends meet, to put a roof over their heads, to pay the rent, to pay for health care, to put food on the table, to pay for child care, pay for college, and maybe if you are an older worker in America, 55 or 60, you're desperately trying to figure out how you're going to put aside a few bucks to retire with dignity. That is the reality. In America today, we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had. Three people, those three people standing right behind President Trump, own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, 170 million people. Top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. And while the very, very wealthy become wealthier, the reality facing ordinary Americans is somewhat different. Today, 60% of our people in the richest country in the history of the world are living paycheck to paycheck. Do you all know what the expression paycheck to paycheck means? All right, I grew up in a family that lived paycheck to paycheck. It meant that every week, every month, there were squabbles, decisions had to be made. How do you pay for the basic necessities? Many of you have grown up in families living paycheck to paycheck. And living paycheck to paycheck is not only an economic struggle. I want to tell you what it also is. There's a fact that we don't talk about in American society, in the media, in Congress terribly much. And that is we have one of the lowest life expectancies of any major country on earth. You all know that? All right. Other countries living 4, 5, 6 years longer than we do. But what is almost never discussed is that working class people in our country live 6 or 7 years shorter lives than the very rich. Do you all know that? Why is that? All right, who said that? Who said that? Stand up. Well, all right. What does stress do to people? All right, what stress does to people, and doctors know, this is not any brilliant observation on my part or your part. What stress does when you have to struggle every day to say, oh my God, my landlord's going to raise my rent by 20%. What do I do? I can't afford it. What do I do with my kids? My car broke down. How the hell do I get to work? And if I don't get to work because I can't afford the $1,000 it costs to fix my car, I'm going to get fired. If I get fired, how do I survive? Oh my God, my mother is ill. What am I supposed to do? She can't afford her prescription drugs. How do I pay for that? All right, my kid got sick and I'm working. How do I take off of work to take care of my sick kid if I'm going to get fired? You add all of that up, day after day, year after year, it wrecks people's minds, it wrecks people's bodies, and it causes them to die a lot earlier than people who do not have to worry about that economic pressure. That's what's going on in America today. And while the very wealthiest people become wealthier, 85 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured. We spend twice as much per capita on health care as the people of any other nation. But the function of our health care system is not to provide quality care to all. It is to make the insurance companies and the drug companies enormously wealthy. We need the best educated workforce in the world. And yet young people are going tens of thousands of dollars in debt in order to get the education that they need. Half of older workers have nothing in the bank as they face retirement. And unbelievably, I did not know this. I was chairman of the committee that deals with this stuff. I had to learn about it. 25% of senior citizens in America are now living on $15,000 a year or less. Now, you tell me how anybody in America, let alone a senior, who often has health care needs, other needs, how do people survive on $15,000 a year? So we are living in a society where the people on top make billions, doing phenomenally well. 25% of seniors living on $15,000 or less, and we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. We are going to change those priorities. And to show you, to just discuss for a moment how obscene the level of oligarchy in America is today, let me read to you what was reported in Bloomberg News just a few days ago. Quote, Bloomberg News, Elon Musk's net worth, $397.1 billion as of Tuesday's close, is up more than 50% since the election. First, Tesla Incorporated surged, then SpaceX became the world's most valuable tech startup, and XAI nearly doubled its valuation before looking to do it again. Now, X is looking to join Elon Musk, other companies, quote, in leveraging the billionaires' unprecedented political power, end of quote. But when we talk about oligarchy, it is not just the massive amounts of income and wealth inequality that currently exists. It's not just that we are living in two Americas, people on top, off doing their thing with incredible wealth, tens of millions of people struggling. That's not just what we're talking about when we discuss oligarchy. What we are also talking about is that today the oligarchs have enormous political power. As all of you know or should know, we have a corrupt political system which, as a result of this disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, allows billionaires to literally buy elections. You get one vote, they buy elections. Mr. Musk himself donated $270 million into Trump's campaign, and his reward for that contribution is that he is now arguably the most important person in government, more powerful than Trump. Further, he is using his extraordinary wealth, not only here in the United States, but to support right-wing extremists all over the world, including an extreme right-wing party in the election in Germany tomorrow. This situation is so absurd. This is how crazy the corrupt political system is in America now. And Musk himself is so very arrogant that he is intervening, getting involved in a Supreme Court election in the state of Wisconsin. And he is putting money against a candidate who has the very radical idea that women should be able to control their own bodies. But I want you all to think about it for a moment. Think about all that's going on in America. He is so arrogant. He's going to get involved in a Supreme Court election in one state. And if he can get involved and win a Supreme Court election in one state, what can he not win? Brothers and sisters, that is not the democracy that men and women fought and died to defend. And I should point out that the role of billionaires in politics, it's not just Musk, it's others. It's not just Republican billionaires, it is Democratic billionaires. It is the corruption of the two-party system. And that is why, among many, many other things, we have got to overthrow this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision and move to public funding of elections. So in an America where the people on top are doing extraordinarily well, while over the last 50 years, you know why people in this country are angry? Over the last 50 years, the average that working people today are earning less in inflation-adjusted wages than 50 years ago, despite all of the increases in worker productivity and technology. Can you imagine that? Almost all of the new wealth that has been created has gone to the top 1%. So that's the reality that we're in right now. And I think about all of that, when I think about all of the money going to the top, working people struggling, I remember the very profound and prophetic statement that President Abraham Lincoln made at Gettysburg in 1963. And it's funny, every year I usually try to get to a parade in Vergennes, Vermont. It's a lovely parade on Memorial Day, and often the organizers of the parade bring up some high school kid who recites the Gettysburg Address. And if you all remember what Lincoln did, and this was in 1863, terrible battle in Gettysburg, thousands and thousands of soldiers killed trying to end the horror of slavery. And Lincoln looks out in the battlefield, and this is what he said, and it's important to remember, quote, "We here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." And that is what we are fighting for, government of the people, by the people, for the people, not a government of the billionaires, by the billionaires, or for the billionaires. But it is not just oligarchy, as dangerous as that is. It's not just oligarchy that we are fighting. We are also fighting what is equally dangerous, and that is Trump's moving this country to authoritarianism. As some of you may have seen, Trump recently posted a statement that said, and I quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." What does that mean? It means essentially that Trump believes he can do anything he wants for any reason. He can ignore Congress. He can ignore the courts. He is above the law. And that's not just talk. That is exactly how he has been behaving. As many of you know, Trump, in violation of the Constitution and federal law, is attempting to suspend all federal grants and loans, and we've heard some of that from previous speakers. That means he has tried to block funding, and with some cases has blocked funding, for Medicaid, the Veterans Administration, Head Start, food stamps, homeless veterans, etc., etc. Tens of millions of Americans, some of the most vulnerable people in our country, were impacted by that decision. Fortunately, the American people have fought back, and the courts have stopped them from doing his worst. But as you heard, he is still trying and, in fact, is throwing out federal workers illegally and unconstitutionally all over this country. Unconstitutionally, he has dismembered agencies established by Congress. You can't do that, including USAID. USAID helps to keep alive some of the very poorest children and people throughout the world. That the richest person on earth is forcing children, the poorest children, to go hungry and unnecessarily die is a moral outrage. Trump has dismembered the Consumer Financial Protection Board, which has saved Americans billions of dollars from illegal corporate and banking activities. He has even taken control over the Kennedy Center and now wants to take over the post office as well. But it's not just usurping the power of Congress. He is undermining and challenging the role of the federal courts. I don't know if you have been hearing what Vice President Vance has been saying. And what he has been saying is that despite 150 years of American jurisprudence, Trump has the right to go forward regardless of what the courts say. In other words, according to Vance, the courts do not have the right to stop unconstitutional acts of a president. But it is not just in this march toward authoritarianism, it is not just usurping the power of Congress and the courts. What authoritarians do is they go after all forms of dissent, starting with the media, in an unprecedented way. Unprecedented. He has forced ABC to a settlement with him for a TV story he did not like. Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, has also had to respond and settle a lawsuit that he brought. He has sued CBS's 60 Minutes for billions of dollars for another story he did not like during the campaign. And incredibly, he has sued the Des Moines Register, your own paper here, for the crime of doing a poll whose results he disagreed with. And now his FCC is investigating PBS and NPR. So it is obvious what he is doing. He is attempting to intimidate the media. He is telling them that if you write a story or if you do an investigative piece that I don't like, we're going to sue your company for billions of dollars. So all over the country, the people who own these media, small papers, whatever, they say to their reporters, hey, you better think twice. Don't do that story. We can't take a lawsuit. Even if we win it, it'll cost us millions of dollars in the courts. That is what authoritarians do. Brothers and sisters, we are also dealing with a new phenomenon, which is the big lie. I will not shock you to tell you that politicians occasionally lie. Always have. But what you're seeing now is something that we really have never seen, and that is the big lie, saying something that is totally outrageous. All right? Trump continues to argue that the 2020 election that Biden won was stolen from him. A big lie. The January 6th, 2021 insurrection was, according to Trump, a day of love. Climate change is a hoax, according to Trump, originating in China. And just the other day, in a way that is going to impact the entire world, Trump announced, to the shock of everybody, that it was Ukraine that started the war, not his good friend Vladimir Putin, that Zelensky is a dictator, not Mr. Putin. So, brothers and sisters, we have a lot on the table. We've got to fight oligarchy. We've got to fight authoritarianism. We've got to figure out how we deal with a big lie, especially when that big lie gets out on platforms like Musk's Twitter, which goes out to hundreds of millions of people and is repeated over and over again. That's big stuff that we got to deal with. But I want to talk to you for a moment about something that is very immediate, and that is the so-called reconciliation bill. That's a fancy term in Congress. It's a big bill that the Republicans right now are working on. And what that bill does is that at a time of unprecedented income and wealth inequality, this legislation will provide over $1 trillion in tax breaks to the billionaire class and the entire 1%. It will make the very richest people in this country even richer. And where does it get that money? Well, it gets that money by cutting Medicaid, housing, nutrition, education, and the other basic needs and programs that working families depend upon. We cannot allow that legislation to pass. That is not what the American people want, and in fact, it's exactly the opposite of what the American people want. I look at a lot of polls, and what the American people say is, don't give billionaires a tax break, demand that they start paying their fair share of taxes. And what the American people say very clearly is, don't cut Medicaid or Medicare, expand Medicaid or Medicare. Now, one of the reasons that I was in Omaha last night and Iowa City now is that in both of those communities, you have Republican members of Congress who won by relatively small margins. In the House of Representatives right now, the Republicans have, I think, 218 seats. Democrats have 215. It's a 3-vote majority. That means that if 2 Republicans tell their leadership that they are not going to slash Medicaid, education, and housing in order to give massive tax breaks to billionaires, that legislation is defeated. And what I'm asking you here in Iowa City is to tell your Congresswoman to do just that. Vote no on this legislation. If she does that, and one other Republican does that, that bill is dead. But brothers and sisters, our job, as difficult as it is not just to defeat that legislation, not just to take on oligarchy and authoritarianism and a culture of greed. We've got to do more. And what we have got to do is rally the American people to understand a very simple but profound fact. We are the richest country in the history of the world. We are not a poor country. And in the richest country in the history of the world, there is no rational reason why we are not providing a decent standard of living for every man, woman, and child in our nation. That's not utopian thinking, you know. That is, in fact, what exists in a number of countries around the world. In America, we must establish that health care is a human right, not a privilege. It is not radical to say that every American, regardless of income, should be able to walk into a doctor's office and get the care that he or she needs. It is not radical to say that if you're struggling with cancer or some other terrible disease, you should not go bankrupt or deplete your savings in order to pay the damn bills. In the richest country on earth, every American worker is entitled to earn a decent standard of living. We must raise the minimum wage in this country to a living wage, at least $17 an hour. And at a time when millions of workers all over this country want to join unions because they understand that unions are the path to decent wages and benefits and working conditions, we got to make it easier for workers to join unions by passing the PRO Act. We should have in our country the best public educational system in the world. We should be attracting the best and the brightest and paying them the salaries that they deserve. No teacher should make less than $60,000 a year. We need to understand that the ages of 0 through 4 are the most important intellectually and emotionally for a human being, which means we need high-quality child care that is affordable for every American family. And we don't need our young people who are getting a higher education to come out of school $50,000 in debt. Not a radical idea to expand the concept of public education and say that every public college and university in America should be tuition-free. All over America, certainly in my state of Vermont, I expect here in Iowa, people are having a difficult time paying for housing. We desperately need to build millions of units of low-income and affordable housing, put millions of people to work doing that. And despite what Trump thinks, we understand that climate change is an existential threat to this planet. And we're going to take on the greed of the fossil fuel industry, who put their short-term profits ahead of the future of this planet. And together, we will not let Trump and his friends divide us up. We are going to fight to abolish all forms of bigotry. This is a tough time. It's a scary time for the country. There is no denying it. But what I want to do is to remind you that this is not the first difficult moment that our country has faced. I want you to take a little tour with me on American history. And I want you to think in a very serious way that back in the 1770s, people throughout this country said, you know what, we're tired of the autocracy of the King of England. Yeah, we know he is the most powerful person on earth. We know that he has this great army, great navy. But you know what? We want our own independence. And those guys and women put their lives on the line. They took on the King of England. People said, you can't be done. It's impossible. They're too powerful. They took him on. They won. Don't forget that. People said it was impossible, but they did it. And I want you to think about that when this country was formed, it was only rich white men who had the right to vote. And working people over the years, it did not happen overnight. People said, you know what? We want the right to vote as well. And the fight for universal suffrage was not easy. And people said, it's impossible. You know, that's the way the system is. Rich people have the power, they have the money, they vote. People fought, and over the years, we had universal suffrage. In 1920s, women won the right to vote. We look back on it now, we say, oh, no big deal. Everybody has the right to vote. Trust me, that was a huge struggle. People had to overcome huge hurdles. They won that struggle. And in the 1850s, 1860s, people stood up and said, slavery is a moral outrage. It must end in America. And God knows how many tens of thousands of people fought and died to end slavery. It was difficult, but it was accomplished. In the early part of this century, workers who were exploited ruthlessly, incredible hours, fired arbitrarily, dangerous jobs, they said, we want a union. And the companies, in some cases, actually shot them, beat them up. You're never going to form a union. We own this company. We will tell you what to do. They fought back, and workers won the right to unionize. For God knows how long, how many decades, women said, we will control our bodies, not the government. And women won that right. It's a right that Trump and his friends are trying to take away, but we're not going to let them do that. And in the 30s, in the 1930s, in the midst of a terrible depression, Congress passed Social Security, Medicare, and over the years, Medicaid, minimum wage, clean air, and water standards. People said, you can't do that. Government can't do that. People stood up and demanded it happen. Now, I say all of that to put it in a context. Yeah, these are very, very tough times. We're taking on people with incredible wealth and power. They own the media. They own the political process. And sometimes I know it can become overwhelming. We can feel despair. But in the past, Americans stood up, they fought back, they won. We can do the same thing. So let me conclude by saying that my coming here today is by no means the end of my involvement in these struggles here in Iowa and elsewhere. In the next, we are going to be in this full time, and in the next few days you'll be hearing from us by text and email, and I'm going to ask you in those texts and emails to do just a couple of things. First, call your member of Congress to demand that she votes no on any bill that cuts Medicaid, housing, nutrition, education, or other basic needs in order to give tax breaks to the richest people in this country. Can you make that call? Secondly, demand that your member of Congress hold a town hall meeting with you. You know, I love Iowa. I've been all over the state, and I'm happy to be with you today, but I am not your congressperson. Bring your congressperson. This looks like a beautiful room. Bring her here and ask her the questions. And understand, you know, politicians can wiggle a little bit, but be very clear. Will she vote no on the Republican reconciliation bill, no tax breaks for billionaires, and cuts to programs that working people need? So, brothers and sisters, I honestly believe that we can take on Trumpism and defeat it. Yes, we can. We can. What the ruling class, these guys don't become billionaires because they're dummies. They're not. They're very smart guys. They work very hard. And one of the things that they do, which is very powerful and effective, is they essentially get the word out in one way or another to the people of this country that says, look, we're multi-billionaires. We own the media. We own the political process. We own the company that you work for. We got the power. You don't. And there ain't nothing you can do about it. Your job is to work for us. That's what your job is. And they want to, when they say those things implicitly, what they are trying to do is demoralize the American people and make us feel hopeless. Oh, God, we can't do anything. That's what they want you to believe. It ain't true. If we do not allow Trump and his friends to divide us up by the color of our skin or our religion or where we were born or our sexual orientation, if we stand together, we win. Because at the end of the day, I'm not a PhD in math, but I do know that 99% is a hell of a larger number than 1%. So now is the time to go outside of our comfort zone. Now is not the time for despair, for feeling helpless. Now is the time to stand up, to fight back, to take on Trumpism, and not only to defeat Trumpism, but to create the kind of great nation we know we can become. Thank you all very much.